Okay, right. Shall we start? So, hello and welcome to the very first episode of the Inside Electric podcast. My name is Katy Fairman.
I'm Hazel Southwell.
And today we're going to be bringing you the pilot episode in which we'd like to think it's slightly different to a standard podcast.
Yeah. We're trying new things.
Yeah, trying new ground. Basically, what we're going to attempt to do is build a Jenga tower.
It's the Inside Electric guide to how to build a Formula E.
Yeah, I think that's true. Like, if you're watching this through video, firstly, hello, and we apologise for this. Sorry, that's really rude. Hazel might not want to apologise for that.
No, I do.
How to start a podcast, offend all guests and people on the podcast. But you'll be able to see that we've got these neon yellow bricks. All of them have got something different on them, which has been used to make Formula E the championship that it is today. Would you say that's a fair assessment of what this is?
We wanted to do a sort of introduction to Formula E, but not as you know it.
Yeah, a bit more exciting, a bit more interesting, rather than just us droning on for an hour and being like, back in 2011, this happened and da da da. So yeah, we thought we'd try something a little bit different, and hopefully it works out well and it's not a complete failure. But I'm sure they'll be alright. I'm really negative about this.
Hopefully it's not a complete failure.
No.
Which, to be fair, was kind of the inception of Formula E.
I love the way your brain works.
To take it to the very roots of the series.
Yeah. Right, so...
Let's get building.
Mm-hmm.
I think you've got the first one, Katy.
I think I do. Right, so let's start by building this tower. And the first one I have here is FIA Electric Series. There's no way you're going to be able to see that, but this is what it says. And I'll put that in the middle.
So Formula E appeared at a quite pivotal point. Obviously, the FIA, which is Motorsport's governing body, had been interested in electric technologies for a while. Formula One had gone hybrid or had been pushed towards being hybrid, and there was more and more interest in establishing things like the very low-key FIA Clean and New Energies Championship, which is like a secret little European rallying thing that nobody ever mentions, which is an electric series. But there hadn't been something spectacular, there hadn't been single-seaters, there hadn't been something that was going to shake the world. And they were really looking for people to make that.
Yeah, no, definitely. The idea apparently came about in 2011 in a restaurant in Paris, was it?
It was in Paris, with the FIA president, Jean Todt, and a man called Alejandro Agag, who is also a key building block of Formula E.
He is. Alejandro, I think I'm right in saying, hadn't done anything motorsporty before. He was in football? Or?
He was running a GP2 team with Lucas de Grassi, but I think very much from the business side more than... He was a Spanish politician, or at the time former Spanish politician, and he refers to himself as a businessman. He's not an ex-racer or kind of a motorsport guy in that respect.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so he was pivotal to helping with Formula E and remained a CEO up until recently.
Yes, he's now stepped. Well, he's chairman now, which is the kind
I don't know what that is in the hierarchy of things.
He's certainly still around, but he's moved over more to starting up another new thing with Extreme E.
Yes, Extreme E.
But it would be extremely fair to say that having somebody like Alejandro who knew how to play politics, who knew how to get his way. And certainly who had the sheer raw determination to actually make it happen. Because once he put his name to it, he was absolutely determined it would be successful. And that to have somebody who is willing to go to whatever lengths it takes to make something work is an essential piece of putting together something as ambitious as Formula E.
Definitely. And one of the first people that were confirmed to be a part of this new and exciting championship was Team China, who, as the name would suggest, were a Chinese team. And they placed their faith in Formula E, which was a huge step for the championship, to have a Chinese team putting their backing into it, especially as they have such a huge potential for electric motorsport and just general vehicles, electric vehicles over there.
Yeah, it was essential that Formula E, in order to be credible, Western Europe is generally where a lot of racing, of the classic racing teams have come from, and the classic racing manufacturers. But for Formula E to work, you cannot start without engaging the world's biggest electric vehicle market, which is China.
Yeah.
And it's also true that the entire motorsport world was desperate for a Chinese team in anything. You know, you had endurance and Formula One chasing for Chinese teams, and Formula E just got one.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of which, it was very important that right from the start they had manufacturers. So Renault were the first sort of the big classic motorsport manufacturers to join Formula E. But more importantly, I think, Mahindra came on board. Mahindra are the single largest vehicle manufacturer in the world, and even if you might not have heard of them very much in a motorsport context, to have an Indian manufacturer come on board for the team, for the championship, and to sort of westernise the championship from the start was super important, because, you know, realistically Western Europe and North America are not going to be the biggest markets for electric vehicles. The manufacturers there are not going to be the biggest makers.
No, definitely. They were two very important people, or like teams, getting involved in the championship at an early stage, which, like you say, was key to Formula E gaining that respect and also that popularity, and people thinking, well, hang on a minute, if these guys are joining in, like, are we missing out by not being a part of it? And that's been something that's continued throughout Formula E, and now we've got other huge manufacturers that have like left programs in order to join Formula E because they don't want to miss out on that electric motorsport journey. So the next one that we've got is street tracks, and this is a key part of Formula E's DNA. It's bringing the racing to the people instead of getting them to get in their cars and drive miles and miles out of town to some sort of, not weird, but what's the right word?
Well,
Like,
it's definitely windswept and probably a bit scruffy, and you know, you have to be quite determined to go to a traditional motorsport circuit.
Definitely.
And of course, traditional motorsport is still popular.
Yeah.
You know, you can go down to Brands Hatch for the BTCC and you can see just how many people are very much willing to do that. But in selling a new series, Formula E had to do something different, partly to avoid the comparison, because in its first season it knew it wasn't going to be competing with the speeds of Formula One, and isn't now.
No.
And also to provide a USP. You know, electric vehicles are more suited to cities, and to show that the cars were driving on real streets and real unaltered streets, which I think, to be fair, was probably actually a function of not being able to afford to resurface it at the start. But you know, they run road tyres, or fundamentally road tyres, on real streets, and that's reaching a different audience. It's doing something different, and it's also demonstrating this technology, which the point of it is to prove in the real world.
No, 100%. And I mean, I love the street tracks that they race on. I like the fact that, you know, it's not perfect. And I mean, when we were in Zurich, I think it was, we were racing across, they were racing across tram lines and things like that. And, you know, like you say, it just proves that an electric vehicle can do exactly what a petrol or diesel car can do in the middle of the cities, which is exactly where the electric vehicle market is sort of targeting now, is, you know, dashing around from city, places in the city and things like that. So.
Speaking of which, they needed a car.
Oh yes, that was quite a thing.
So Formula E sort of dithered quite a lot between 2011 and 2014. There was a lot that was going on beneath the surface, but you couldn't see very much happening until Spark. They basically realised that they needed some cars in order to run season one, and got a tender from Dallara, who make quite a lot of motorsport chassis. They do things like the F2 chassis, they formed a separate company called Spark to manufacture 40 cars for the first Formula E race, but to get hold of them and to convince them that this was something that they should do, because to get a company that was even willing to build an electric race car which had no guidelines, no testing, and things kept changing at the time for the Gen 1 chassis. I mean, you need it. It's very important you have a car if you're going to try and race it.
But yeah, I can imagine that the task they had was insanely challenging, especially having to report to somebody like Alejandro who probably wants things in a certain way, or even just the team in the FIA. Even when they were deciding what the next step was going to be with Gen 2, I know that was a very difficult process because everybody had all these wild ideas, and that's developing on this Gen 1 Spark car. So to start from total scratch with what they wanted to do. I mean, the cars, I think we can all be in agreement and say they looked extremely basic. They almost looked like toy cars that you would, like some sort of Hot Wheels make or something, but they did the job.
They did.
They started, I don't know what I'm going to say there, so I won't just get that for that.
Which, brings us to, they managed to get a car and a chassis, and the big challenge was nobody knew how to make an electric race car safe.
No.
Like, nobody had made an electric single-seater, so how do you know you've got this enormous battery, you've got this weight in the back, how do you make it just work and function as a race car? And to get something that you were able to actually crash test to FIA standards, that was an important step.
Yeah.
Because nobody, I mean, when Spark first started the project, the question was, can it be done? Not, yes, we're going to do it, and here's how. Which also did influence the racing. So when they first made the car, they were proposing that there'd be a battery swap mid-race. They'd managed to get Williams Advanced Technology to make a battery that was 24 kilowatt hours, which is about the same size as Nissan Leafs at the time. And that really isn't enough to go a race distance at any kilowattage whatsoever. You'd be crawling around. Like, do you remember when they used to do the intro lap and it would be so ridiculously slow? It was 30 kilowatts or whatever. I can't remember. It took about 5 minutes at the start of every race. And you might think, well, we've made a race car that can't actually complete the race, is a bit of a killer problem. They thought about battery swapping. That wasn't going to be functional or safe.
No.
And so they just put in car swap.
Yeah.
Which was a much mocked feature of early Formula E. I mean, it was also kind of iconic to see a race car driver absolutely hoon into his garage, panickedly unstrap himself and hop from one car to the next.
Trying not to take out all of his engineers at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, I still miss seeing the taller ones try and extract themselves.
Like hitting themselves above anything above or whatever. But
but it was a weird feature, and everyone said it's ridiculous. You can't go racing like that. But we did for 4 seasons.
Yeah. Exactly.
And it was simply a solution that got the cars off the start line.
Yeah, definitely. I know there was quite a lot of questions asked, especially my dad, who hadn't really got much of an idea about Formula E, wanting to know why they were shipping around 2 cars. It's like, well, that can't be very environmentally friendly to send double the weight of what you could have. But like you say, it was a key point in the championship, and through doing that, they were able to keep Formula E going and then develop a battery that lasted a whole race, and like you say, it's very entertaining. So. The next thing, which was also, it proves entertaining. I think
entertaining and controversial.
Yeah, ooh, we love a bit of entertaining and controversial. But it's fan boost, which is still a thing.
It is.
I think will probably continue to still be a thing for a long time to come. But what do you think about that? Do you think maybe, or?
I suspect possibly that fan boost is beginning to have run its course. But what it did was incredible. And people complain about fan boost all the time, and they say, oh, it's ridiculous, that there's a mechanism
Yeah.
for some drivers to be given a tiny little burst of extra power. It comes from their remaining usable energy anyway, but they can use a higher mode of power for a very short part of the race. I personally don't think it has ever affected race results, apart from when Sebastian Buemi span in Mexico when he was activating it. But it does. The point of it was that Formula E was born on social media. It was born onto the internet at a time when other racing series really did not understand online at all. Did not understand community management. Did not understand engagement. Like, it's very easy to look at Formula One's YouTube channel now and be like, oh, they understand memes. But at the time, really, no one was doing it at all.
No.
And so it was another thing where Formula E did something that traditional motorsport didn't like and sort of considered it crass and whatever. But the fact is that it meant that people were mentioning Formula E. People were going on Twitter and they were talking about Formula E. And for a new championship where the races are quite spaced out, the calendar actually it was incredibly unstable in season 1 in particular. It was a reminder that it was on. It was a reminder that it existed. It was 6 days before the race. You get a build-up of people tweeting and talking about it. And like, in terms of a publicity mechanism, it was genius. And it has done its job. Formula E has enormous social numbers. And yes, it is blatantly rigged. And a lot of it was probably, I mean, I don't think in any way the brilliance of the publicity stroke is mitigated by any effect on racing.
No, but like, certainly in the early days, lots of people, especially teams and things, knew that fan boost was something that could get people in. Like, when I went to Paris in season 2, I think it was, there were queues around the block for people getting free Renault caps and merchandise and stuff. And all you had to do is like get one of their iPads, log into Twitter, hashtag fan boosting across Sebastian Buemi, whatever. I did it myself and I still have my Renault cap to this day. But like you say, it was a way to get that engagement and, like you said, let people know the race was on, or that Formula E was a thing and that you should, start paying attention to it.
Yeah, because if, most people in London probably didn't know there was a race in Battersea whilst it was on.
No.
But if you notice that the trending topic for London is fan boost, then you're like, what the hell's that?
It's a fan boost.
And it made people fans of Formula E. It made people pick someone to follow and to back.
Driver.
Which a lot of the drivers, there are some big names in Formula E, and there always have been. But even the big names in season 1, I mean, the big names were like Jev and Sebastian Buemi. It's like 2 people who got fired by Toro Rosso. And were like not, I mean, they are famous and they are good drivers, but they weren't especially people who were known in their own, I mean, it's not Lewis Hamilton, is it?
Yeah, exactly.
Which was why the Formula E Driver Club, which was something that was organised before the championship started, was so important. So the first or second employee of Formula E was Lucas di Grassi, himself a very accomplished driver, but in series that are not as notable as something like Formula 1. I mean, he did do Formula 1, but in the worst car in the universe. He set up a scheme to attract good drivers to the series, which was basically to put in place a kind of super license style scoring system. So teams would get help to employ good drivers or drivers that rated highly within this system, so that what you ended up with from the very start would be a competitive field. It would be drivers who were good enough to drive the cars in a way that was compelling to watch, which is a really essential part of putting together a racing series. You can't have like the British F4 grid, who are all very good in their own right, but just launching or like a bunch of, you know, semi-amateurs or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. As well as it being a new and interesting series, it needs to be a good new and interesting series. Otherwise, that interest is just going to go. If the racing isn't good, yes, there might still be interest in the technologies behind the cars and seeing the developments that will come from that. But if your drivers can't race and provide entertainment, then people aren't going to tune in for the next race. They're going to think it's dull and it's boring. But with the driver lineup, like, Formula E is very fortunate in that it has had one of the most competitive lineups in motorsport in a very long time, and still does to this day, you know.
And that's a lot of what attracts more good drivers to it. It's why the grid is so attractive to drivers, is because they want to compete against the best.
Yeah, and you can speak to drivers in the media pen and they'll say, you know, when I first joined Formula E, my mate sort of ribbed me for it and said, oh, what are you going off to do that for? And now they're there saying, well, can you try and get me a test with Team A or Team B and stuff? So it just shows the change in attitudes that Formula E has had since, you know, the start to now.
And that there were drivers who were interested in signing up as well is a credit to how they were able to sell it.
Yeah.
I think by promising them lots of money initially, but still.
But it wasn't only drivers that were keen to get involved, also sponsors were keen, including Julius Bahr, who were one of the first people to get on board. And we were saying whether that was from the first race or the second race, but they were very early people to get behind Formula E, which is just crucial. And they're still there to this day, which is a real credit for Formula E to still hold on to a sponsor of that, you know, standard.
It was essential that names were attached to the sport. Motorsport runs on sponsorship, and it costs a lot of money to take 40 cars around the world and to set up races, and it really helps in your credibility when you're applying to a city to say, oh, could we run like a little race round?
Just a little something.
Could we take over this monument, please? If you happen to have a Swiss private bank backing you. Which brings us to race 1. It actually happened!
It did, in Beijing in 2014. Did you see the first race live, or...?
I don't think I saw it live. I think I saw it subsequently, because it would have been on in the middle of the night.
I think it was on early morning.
Was it?
Yeah. But it was still a very, like, it wasn't on a, 12 o'clock on a Sunday or whatever. It was an early start. But yeah, I can still remember getting up early. I think it was on Channel 4 at that point. Getting up nice and early. Was it Channel 4 or Channel?
I watched it on YouTube.
Oh, okay. I
think it was unlocked on YouTube in season 1. I'm pretty sure. I don't know. I will fully admit, actually, it was my ex-husband that got me into Formula E, so I probably didn't actually pay any attention to the medium we were getting it.
But yeah, I can definitely remember leading up to race 1, watching all videos on YouTube, trying to learn as much as I could about the championship. And then with race 1, although the race was okay, and it wasn't the best racing we've ever seen, but it was good.
It worked. The cars worked.
Yeah.
Most people got to most of the race distance.
But one person who didn't make the full race distance was Nick Heidfeld, who had his colossal crash, which I'm sure will be forever played in the Formula E highlights reel, as being not only one of Formula E's most spectacular crashes, but motorsports. It was a big crash in which he made contact with Nico Prost going into the final corner. I mean, you couldn't really write much better, and to be honest, Formula E needed something like this. Although a crash probably isn't the best way, you want your first ever race like as the highlight, but it brought that drama and that excitement, and thank God Nick was okay. Like that would have been terrible if not, and possibly that could have been Formula E done for if Nick was seriously hurt in that incident, but fortunately he got out of the car. But
and that's an essential part of it. It was that it proved it was the social media moment for the series. It was an instant spectacular thing that people would look at, and it showed how close they were, how hard they were racing, the risks involved, which, because otherwise you'd say, they're tooting around little city circuits, but like the harshness of an impact, and also that it was safe.
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
did crash test. I mean, God forbid you don't want to be crash testing on track.
No.
But Nick got out and
Yeah.
did his iconic
Remembers.
little sprint across to have some firm words with Nico Prost, and that it still remains. I mean, some people, Lewis Hamilton, only found it several years later, but it remains one of Formula E's most distinct and iconic moments. And now when you look at it, you're like, God, those cars look terrible.
Yeah.
And they are kind of tootling because they're running out of energy at the end of the race. But it was still the spectacular moment that the series needed.
Yeah.
Which, the other spectacular moment of season 1, we're going to call that somebody actually won the championship. Nelson Piquet Jr. had his redemptive moment after...
Moments that we shall not mention.
Well, just being knocked around a lot in Formula 1 and having an extremely difficult career.
Yeah.
He took the championship, and there is a lot to be said for having somebody with such a famous racing name, for having somebody who is famous or perhaps notorious within motorsport crying because he's been told he's won the championship, and it means that much to him.
Yeah.
And that's where racing gets really good. It's where it hits you all in the chest cavity.
All the feels.
But that's to inject that much feeling, and also that there were so many drivers who wanted it, that it came down to a 3-way title fight on the final weekend.
What more can you ask for as a championship in its first year as well? And then another thing as well is that the Formula E ended a season because there was so much uncertainty about that. During season 1, I think it was in Long Beach, people were wondering, is this actually going to be Formula E's last race? Because things just, the stars weren't aligning in Formula E's favour. It was just not looking like Formula E was going to work.
Racing series do collapse. Like, there's plenty of things that never make it to a grid. There's certainly a lot of things that never make it to a second season.
Yeah, that's very true. But Formula E powered through, and in doing so...
Actually finished the first season with a guaranteed season 2.
Yes.
Or at least a promised one.
Pinky promise. No, definitely. Season 2, which has proved to be not only better than season 1, but ended with, the famous Degrassi Buemi incident.
It's just essential to have big crashes. But more than that, season 2 was the moment where you got new powertrains, where you got manufacturers making their own technology for the series. So while season 1 had worked, it had been a spec series, and a lot of people still think Formula E is a spec series because it has a spec chassis, but in reality the stuff underneath the cars is pretty different across the field.
Definitely.
And that's that was a huge thing, that you could open up the regulations and have people actually putting together their own powertrains is a huge achievement. Like, when you think about the contortions that any Formula 1 regulatory change, to be like, oh, well, you can't, you have to like slightly change the way that your oil goes towards the energy source. It was a huge piece of Formula E's success, that not only did they manage to put together a set of regulations that could mean you could make varied powertrains, but that manufacturers actually were willing to and did.
Definitely. And like, one of the big things about being in motorsport as a manufacturer is you want to be able to try things with motorsport that then you can bring to your road cars. And so with the opening up like the powertrains and all this sort of technology, it was allowing those manufacturers to do that, and in doing so meant more manufacturers were keen to get involved in Formula E as well. And the next the next building block, as we mentioned beforehand, is season 2 brought with it proper rivals. That's what's written on the blog. But yeah, in Degrassi and Buemi, and the rivalry there was certainly
Heated.
great word. Heated was definitely how I would describe that rivalry, and it went down to the wire to an exceptional London finale in which everybody jokingly said before the final race, "Oh my god, imagine if they crash in the first corner," to them crashing in the first corner and everybody surprised when it happened. I mean, I don't know about you, but I was certainly shocked when I saw it happen. I thought,
I was definitely quite surprised. I mean, obviously racing rivalries do get quite hot, and especially when you're starting side by side with your rival.
Your
for
best
the
friend in the
title.
whole wide world.
Oh yeah, they are such good pals. They actually do get along with each other fine. But yeah, both Buemi and Degrassi really wanted it, and that it was somewhat ridiculous to decide the title on the fastest lap, but it was also quite spectacular.
Yeah.
And resulted in a bizarre podium setup because both Degrassi and Buemi had effectively retired, which meant that we got a cross centre podium.
Yes. Oh, how could I forget about that? Wow. But yeah, that was certainly an interesting weekend. I know Rob Watts, who's one of the guys who is a co-founder at Inside Electric, he was there and he took a photo which I think did massively well on social of just Buemi just crying, sat down in his garage, just having a good old blub, which once again, like you say, it just shows how much it means to these drivers. I think Degrassi was probably long gone by now. He'd done his famous push the camera out the way shot, chucked probably half of his equipment from his glass to his helmet across the garage, and then had stormed off, which, I mean, is probably allowed if you're going to be...
If you're going to lose a title fight.
Yeah. You could probably do it in style at least.
Yeah, you should probably show how much it means in
what is gracious
from your side as well. Which brings us to the continuation of that rivalry into season 3, when Formula E also started... We're not very good at building.
Just you wait till the whole Jenga tower falls. All headphone users, I can only apologise.
Formula E in its third season, it had reached a point where perhaps it was a little bit more sure of itself. There would be a lot of challenges yet to come. It was by no means guaranteed that it would become what it is now, or even that it would survive another subsequent season. But Formula E started to do things a little bit differently and more overtly. It hadn't quite started throwing its weight around in the way that it can now.
Yeah.
But for instance, they just went full on with the environmental message of Formula E and stopped pretending that wasn't part of the project. Degrassi drove the Formula E car across the Greenland iceberg.
Yeah.
Not quite sure how that helps the iceberg. But as a publicity stunt, it was an overt message that yes, this is a championship for if you are concerned about what's happening in the world, if you want to, or don't want to, but if you are worried about the climate, then this is the place for you. We're not dissembling from that or trying to apologise to petrol heads. And Formula E also got a subtle version of something that it would finesse much later, but it replaced the dinky Hot Wheels style front wings that it had been using in the prior 2 seasons with, to be honest, a kind of monstrosity of a thing, which was its sort of bow tie whale shark style front wing, just to make itself look more distinctively like a specific race car rather than a sort of sketchy drawing of what a Formula 1 car might look like in small scale.
Yeah, oh for sure. I remember when they got put on to the Formula E cars going to testing, and just down the whole pit lane, there were every single driver just bouncing their entire body weight on these front wings to make sure that they were fit for the job, which of course they were. But it was just quite entertaining. It was like a little mini trampoline scene going on, just different driver Lucas Ragazzi bouncing up and down the front wing. But yeah, no, it was definitely a step in the right direction and made the cars look that little bit cooler.
You couldn't mistake them for anything else.
No, exactly. They were one of a kind. And another team or manufacturer that joined Formula E, which was hugely important, was Jaguar. And this was a team that had history with motorsport, but hadn't had any involvement in motorsport for a very, very long time. So them deciding to have their comeback with Formula E was hugely important for Formula E itself, showing, this is a championship of the future and big names are getting behind it.
It was at the same time as the Jaguar Land Rover group had announced that all of their vehicles going forwards would have a hybrid or electric element. And so to put Formula E, participating in Formula E as part of that, and to put it as like a commitment for brands who wanted to move towards new technologies, and to say that they were going to try this out of the blue with a barely constructed powertrain, was a bold step, and it was a big, significant announcement, particularly in the UK, where they're still, they are basically our biggest manufacturer.
Yeah, definitely.
And Season 3 didn't just add new manufacturers, but had to actively expand the calendar and increase the ambition of Formula E.
It certainly did, and one of the highlights on the calendar was New York, which, if you're going to go to city centres, going to the biggest city in the world is probably not a bad place to go, with shots of the Statue of Liberty in the background and Manhattan in the background.
And crucially, for Formula E, it was taking advantage of something that Formula E can do that other motorsport series can't. There hadn't been racing in New York City for 80 years, or someone, Ryan Eric King is going to correct me in the comments, and I welcome your contribution. But there hadn't been motorsport there for a long time, because it's very difficult for most series who are going to turn up and throw petrol around to justify their presence in the middle of a city that's already smoggy and congested.
No, definitely. And it proved to be, I still think it's one of my favourite places that I've been to. Formula E just seems to fit so well with the city, and there's genuinely a lot of interest in New York for Formula E.
Another new venue that was added was Montreal, which hosted the season finale. Perhaps less of a direct success. Initially, Montreal had seemed like a godsend for Formula E. It was a spectacular track, it was truly in the city centre, it was actually in the gay village, which was a bold move for a motorsport series. And Montreal is a very arty, very cool city, and it felt like such a big thing. It felt so different to be in the Montreal paddock compared to, say, Battersea, which the previous finale had maybe had some vibes of a village fete. There was no way that you could mistake what was happening in Montreal for anything other than a really spectacular occasion. Unfortunately, that went wrong.
That block will be banished. But in its place.
At the same time as Denis Coderre, the mayor of Montreal, was being disgraced for possible misuse of public funds surrounding Formula E, the major manufacturers of Europe were being in turn disgraced for lying about their diesel emissions, which was a very important part of Formula E's history, because at this point it became basically impossible if you were a German manufacturer of cars to not have an entry, because you needed to clean up your act incredibly fast.
Yes. Yeah.
Which meant that at our beautiful, gigantic Montreal track, everywhere there were banners that said "Welcome Porsche and Mercedes."
Yeah, that was a big turning point in the championship. But although it was bad for the automotive industry, it was great for Formula E. No.
Well, and ultimately, if Formula E is holding manufacturers that are lying about emissions to account, then that is only something that adds to the credibility of the overall series.
That's very true. And also, as well as new additions to the calendar, we also had new rivalries which began to appear in Formula E, which, along with the credibility of the drivers, is something that I think most championships probably need a good old rivalry. I mean, if you look back at the history of Formula One from the last, they're 70 years old now, and the rivalry.
It's all controversial.
Okay.
I don't think we want to get into that here.
But it's been going for decades, and you know, when you think of Formula One, you'll think about rivalries from Prost and Senna to Hunt and Lauda, and I'm not claiming that the rivalries in Formula E are anything compared to, you know, the...
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure. I wouldn't put Degrassi Buemi up with certainly Hunt and Lauda for a bit of...
I mean, Buemi seemed to, at some point, have a rivalry with every single person in the paddock, which is ambitious, but once again, great fun for us to sort of watch that all implode. What was the race where Buemi just had his complete meltdown?
That was Montreal Race 1, when a pit lane eruption...
I just love the fact that Formula E kept it on the telly, because I was watching and I was thinking, please don't cut out. Because normally what they do in the UK is then go to a shot of Dario Franchitti's brother in a broom cupboard. But they kept it on, which full credit to them, because that was outstanding.
It showed the emotions, it showed the passion, it showed how much that the drivers put into it. I was cringing for Sebastian because it was obvious that he'd just lost his temper and couldn't calm down, and he was genuinely upset. He was also behaving quite badly, but it was something where you really saw the passion come out. And I think that when people accuse Formula E of being essentially a PR exercise or something where it's just people who don't care or it's hollow as a series, though the moments like that are the ones that really prove the lie. Someone who has also been accused of doing things in a quite PR-ish way would be that shortly after the racing weekend in Montreal, Nico Rosberg suddenly...
Lord.
well, at the time he was the Formula One World Champion, I think.
Oh, I have forgotten that.
Yeah. So to have somebody who had achieved what he wanted to do in Formula One sort of come over to Formula E, it was a sort of tacit commitment from Mercedes, to whom he was still semi-attached.
Yeah.
But also, it was a big endorsement to have new, popular racing names paying attention to Formula E.
No, and with that, he's obviously had a continued support for Formula E, from testing the Gen 2 car to just being a face in the pit lane who's happy at any point to sort of chat about Formula E, and he's definitely a good person to have involved in the championship. I know in Berlin last year he made his sort of debut appearance in the media conference, didn't he? He spent about the first 5 minutes fiddling with his hair, but then when he'd begun to speak, he spoke a lot of sense. So
even though our faces maybe
didn't. No.
There's a wonderful picture, and we can probably edit this into the video, of the Inside Electric team looking supremely unimpressed by Nico Rosberg. Probably because we were discussing the other big thing that was announced in that press conference or over that Berlin weekend in season 4.
And that was that Formula E would be heading to Riyadh, which still, despite the fact that we've had 2 seasons racing there, is not everybody's favourite choice, but it's a contract that, is it 10-year contract?
It's a 10-year contract.
Holding the season opener of Formula E for, what is now the next 8 years. But that was a hefty contract in still a very controversial place.
It was something that when it was announced, it really shocked me. I was like, why on earth would Formula E go to the home of oil? Why would we go to Saudi Arabia? I certainly had no plans ever in my life to go to Saudi Arabia, and suddenly my job was requiring me to. And Riyadh Riyadh, yes, does generate controversy, but I personally believe that Riyadh is exactly where we should be going. Like, Formula E needs to be confrontational, and if that involves going to the home of oil and saying, you've got to stop using this, then that, to me, is a pretty punk move. I think also the event that Formula E takes to Riyadh is not compromised, so some other sporting or entertainment brands have taken events to Riyadh that are, like, for instance, WWE only takes male wrestlers, whereas a condition of Formula E going was that women were on track. And I think that ultimately the world is going to be like chaotic and dramatic and difficult over the next few years, and a lot of that is down to the need to divest carbon, to work out how we can exist in a highly interconnected world where the main things that we use to do that aren't going to be available to us anymore. And ultimately, the more you can reach out to and engage with people, then the better. I think that you have to ask questions when events are held in controversial locations, and I don't think that anyone should stop asking questions. But I also think that there is an inherent worth to racing in Riyadh, especially as Formula E. And there is a definite inherent worth to racing in Riyadh in that money helped the championship become substantially more stable. And at the end of the day, you do need money to go racing. Which brings us to Generation 2.
Ooh, yeah, the Gen 2 car, which is something I went to go and see unveiled in Geneva I think I was in Geneva for about 4 hours.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, there's a wake up at 6 a.m, run to Gatwick, not literally run because that would be quite...
You're such a globetrotter, Katy.
Oh, I know. Says you that went to Rome in for about 45 minutes last year. But that was like a huge step for Formula E, unveiling what is effectively a Batmobile that's racing on the streets. It's a stunning car. I really love it. And like people that maybe didn't have much of an interest, like my dad comes to mind. He saw this PR clip that they created with Felipe Massa, who also joined Formula E for season 5 with the Gen 2 cars, but he sort of stood up and took notice and was like, wait, that's a Formula E car. And I was like, yeah, that's the future of Formula E. He's like, okay, that is cool. Like that and that meant a lot as somebody who had been a bit of a critic of Formula E for a long time, for him to say, okay, like, this has got my interest, this looks really, really good. This is what F1 should be aiming to do, which
now the concept cars for F1 look like Gen 2 cars, because it is incredibly cool, and it was something that Spark, when they designed the chassis, they thought that they'd gone the wildest they possibly could, took it to Formula E, and Formula E were like, take the back wing off. And so now it's a tremendous piece of engineering. It's got kind of strange features, like the fact that there is no back wing, there's sort of 2 split fins, and the only downforce on Formula E cars, which have almost none whatsoever, was coming from the back wing on the Gen 1 chassis. So when they took that off, they had to finagle the floor of the car so that the tiny shreds of downforce that you get in the car is all generated by the floor, which means that when the car's driving over rough surfaces, which they are all the time on Formula E tracks, you get this tremendous turbulence underneath the car, and it sounds so threatening. So the chassis itself, this bisexually lit Batmobile became this. It was the first thing that looked really mean. Like the Gen 1 cars were iconic in their own right by simply existing, but this thing did a lot more than just function. It's really cool. If you're a kid and you see that car, you're like, yeah, that car goes fast. Yeah.
No, it was a huge part of Formula E and helping create this brand that we know and love now. The other thing that came with Gen 2 was that car swaps were known more as Formula E had eventually created a battery which lasted the entire race distance. Now, a lot of people were upset to see car swaps go. We talked about it obviously earlier in the podcast of what an iconic part it had become in Formula E, but instead of this car swaps, something needed to be done to make sure that pole sitter didn't just, it wasn't just to follow the leader. Something interesting and exciting had to be incorporated, and that was the introduction of attack mode, which I believe is the next building block.
It is, and we're getting quite close to the top of the tower at this point.
And it's not collapsed yet, which is
highly
impressive.
We're much better at building than we initially see. Attack mode is a brilliant stroke. Like, Formula E lost its pit stop with the loss of car swaps. There is no need to swap tyres in Formula E. I'm sure some of the drivers would love to drive on slicks and have super grippy traction rather than skidding around on the ridged Michelins. But obviously there's no refuelling, and so as a consequence it sort of looked as though some of the tactical elements that disrupt racing, rather than having it as a straight lights to flag sprint, would be lost as part of moving to Generation 2. And car swap had always been sort of like quite a lame pit stop, because basically everybody had to do it roughly the same time. You could probably vary it by a lap or 2 or 3 if you really pushed it, but realistically the energy saving would force you in at roughly the same time as most of the other cars. And that was replaced with something that puts the technology under real stress. It puts the drivers under real stress. So you have to manage your battery temperatures, you have to manage the stress on your powertrain, you have to think, like, if I go to a higher power mode with attack mode, am I even going to be able to make use of it? Because my tyre's completely shot. And you have to deal with it by activating it Mario Kart style, by running over part of the track, whilst you've got some other driver, or 23 other drivers, all over your rear wing, or lack thereof, all over your diffuser, and it puts that tactical element directly into the racer's hands. It's not them being told that they need to box, that the pit crew's ready. They have to think it through themselves, and that to me is something that generates like truly exciting racing, and it obviously makes it a real driver's sport, which is exactly what you want.
Exactly. And with that, we've seen a couple of times with attack mode how it has affected races. I just think of Sebastian Buemi in Mexico last season, and how trying to take that attack mode, it didn't work in his favour. Not only did he end up nearly taking his teammate out,
God, he has really bad luck with different power modes in Mexico, doesn't he?
He does. Oh, poor old boy, he's clearly cursed. It's the high altitude. But
he's Swiss.
Yeah. That logic is just... So as well as the really sexy cars and going to some pretty cool places, Formula E also managed to take 9 different winners in Season 5. The first 8 were all different from different teams as well, which is, in modern motorsport, what an achievement to do. It meant it was a pain in the ass for us, and the drivers really, because nobody could predict what was going to happen, but it meant that it was a championship that was on sort of everybody's lips. Have you seen Formula E? Who do you think's going to win next? Because there are some people, like Pascal Wehrlein, for example, he should have taken a win last year, and he didn't. And you just think, God, if we had a bigger calendar, you makes you wonder how many drivers could go on to win a race that year that were different.
If we had a Formula 1 style 21 race calendar, please don't. I will die. You could probably have seen more than half the grid on the top step.
Definitely.
And it was a function it was proof that Formula E functioned as it should, which is that it was producing very close racing, that it was producing racing where you had to watch it to predict it, rather than, as we've all got rather good at, kind of casting our eye down the entry list and being like, well, that's probably the podium, isn't it?
That person's clearly going to win, because they have done for the past so many races or whatever.
And that was a function of the success of Formula E's technology. So the manufacturers that are in it right now really care about extracting their final few tiny shreds of advantage that they can get from their powertrains, from the way that they are understanding the tyres, from the way that they've managed to simulate and understand a circuit, which led to last season really quite a tech war that sort of got quite paranoid. Like, you can talk about Formula E as the emotion of the drivers, you can talk about it as how much they all care about it, but when you've actually got big manufacturers throwing shade at each other and insisting that Nissan have flywheels in their MGUs and all kinds of things, true or not, it did lead to a tech war, and it led to showing quite how competitive and fierce the technology is here, which is an essential part of the championship being that close and getting down to the wire and being something that is credible and functioning for further technology.
Exactly. I mean, motorsport is one of the only sports that allows, you know, sport and technology to work in such harmony, which is another, you know, really important thing to make sure that Formula E is, you know, making sure they challenge new technologies and invent new things.
And we also got the start of, well, so Formula E is of course new, and Formula E is of course unpredictable.
Yes.
But as of season 5, we have a two-time we have a two-time champion.
Yes.
In Jean-Eric Vergne. One of the success stories of the series, very much. Like, he came to Formula E quite broken, and is now the most highly awarded, at least if you look at trophies, driver in the series, and hugely successful and an ambassador for it. And to have somebody take that second title, it's not saying that he's going to win forever, he certainly isn't. That's just not how Formula E works. But it is a promise that there's something to establish here, that it's not all random, that it's not, you know, that Buemi or Degrassi could take a second title, or somebody could come from who knows where and manage to achieve something in a team. You know, Jev took his 2 titles, one in a customer team and secondly in a new partnership. Like, so...
Yeah, and it's not like Jev secured that second championship, you know, halfway through the calendar. He took it down to the last race. I think going into New York, was it 7 possible people that could win the Drivers' Championship? I mean, obviously, some were less likely than others. I think it might have been Robin or Antonio or something, had to win both races, and all the fields that were, you know, in contention for the championship had to not finish, or to that extent. But I mean, it's still...
It could happen.
This is Formula E.
Never rule out the mathematically impossible.
Yeah.
No, sorry, mathematically possible. Do rule out the mathematically impossible.
No, I can definitely see Tom Dillman getting that championship. But yeah, it just proved that Jean-Eric Vergne means business, and if that means that the rest of the drivers have got to work extra hard to make sure that they forbid him from becoming a 3-time consecutive world champion, then bring it on. The next building block that I have is one that is fairly new news to Formula E, and that is their partnership with the K-pop band BTS, which is something I never thought I'd be saying Formula E doing, but actually could prove to be one of the best marketing decisions of not just a motorsports team, but possibly a sports team ever, at least up there with one of the best.
It's one of the most incredible things I've ever heard of. I don't know how Formula E have organised this. I don't know how they've got together. But BTS, as a phenomenon, have what's literally called an army of fans. Their fan base is somewhere in the region of 44, 45 million people worldwide. That's a really quite chunky country. And you know, their fans are very committed, and their fans are interested in things that BTS endorse, especially with us going to Seoul for Korean E-Prix this year. It's an incredible thing to have artists as big as BTS whose fan base are mostly people who care about the environment. They're people who, you know, they're young people, and like by default we are forced. Sorry, no, I'm not young people. You are forced to care about the environment, and that's to get that level of engagement, to get something that has that reach beyond the sport itself. Motorsport is a terribly insular world, and frankly, like hides itself away a lot of the time. Formula E has always done that thing of bucking that trend of sort of showing itself off in a way that you know does annoy people, but that's part of, to be provocative is the point. And to invite in fans of BTS to become part of Formula E, to become interested in Formula E, is a huge endorsement. It's also, bluntly, BTS's fandom is primarily female, and women are very rarely, I mean, I don't think many other publications have opened their podcast with an all-female section.
Yeah, hello.
Inside Electric doing things differently. But it appeals directly to a demographic who is simply uncatered to by the majority of traditional forms of this sport, and that's exactly what Formula E should be doing. Formula E basically every year does something like this, like a Riyadh the year before, where you're like, I can't believe I'm saying this. And that's what it should be.
Yeah, oh definitely. It keeps it in the news, it keeps it relevant. And I mean, going back to BTS, when the partnership was announced, like I've known about BTS for a few years now because they're becoming, you know, a bit more involved in Western artists and things like that. But their fans, you can tell they're so passionate about, you know, the environment and all that sort of stuff. They were there sharing videos of BTS at, you know, conferences, talking about environmental changes and how we can make an impact and you know, help the environment, and they lap it up that BTS are an influence, and that's exactly, if they can pass on the message of Formula E and all that goes with it, then that's just huge for the championship.
They do look quite cute in race suits too. Which, having annoyed the motorsport establishment once again, Formula E has also done one last thing recently, which is an important step towards very much ingratiating itself within the motorsport establishment, which is that we have finally become a world championship.
I feel at this point I should get like a party popper, little
just one of those little champagne miniatures like you get on a plane.
Yeah. We've got glasses, well I have a glass of water, an empty one, but we can do this is for like ASMR. Oh, nice. But yeah, we can toast that. That's a nice bit of news to sort of end this building block of Formula E on, is the World Championship status. It means so much for the championship and proving it that it is, you know, it's not going anywhere. We're here to stay, and it's well earned that World Championship status.
It's something that was always regarded as, because you achieve World Championship status by racing across the world, which Formula E already did, and by paying the FIA some money, which Formula E had priorly refused to. But it's also a testament that both Formula E is in a comfortable enough place to spend money on fripperies, such as World Championship status, and also that it plans to stick around. There is an inherent sort of solidity and credibility which is afforded by being an FIA World Championship.
Definitely. Well, that brings us to the end of our very neon yellow Jenga block.
And hopefully we'll be adding more layers in the years to come.
Yeah. I want to know if we did this segment in 5 years' time, how high the Jenga block will be. Who else could...
We'll have to get another set.
Yeah. Just keep building it up and up and up. And we'll be looking back and going, oh, you know, we said, you know, Formula E do things that you think, I never saw that coming. Well, here's a dozen more.
Oh, we thought BTS were big, but now they've brought back the Beatles.
One Direction have all joined back together to fight
Harry
climate change.
Styles drives for Envision Virgin.
To be fair, it goes along with the boy bandish lineup they've got at the moment.
That's true.
Right, so that brings us to the end of the very first podcast. Hazel, how do you think it went?
Well, I'm not looking forward to editing it.
I think that's a fair summary of how it went. But like we said, this is the first podcast. We wanted to do something a little bit different. And hopefully we have achieved that with our impressive Jenga block that we have put together. But if you would like to see more ideas or more different things from our podcast, then just let us know in the comments. To be honest, we're up for trying most things.
Pretty much anything, yeah. Oh no.
Inside Electric, not for most things. Oh, we were the worst people to record the pilot. We've set such a tone for this podcast. And Hazel's broken. I broke Hazel, I'm sorry. To be fair, that was the next thing to go after your GoPro.
Yeah.
It's like dead on the floor.
GoPro me. It's all over. But thank you so much for watching and listening to us. We will be making these regularly, probably with less board games.
You never know. Snakes and Ladders Formulary Edition or something.
And if you enjoyed this, then you can get our written content on insideelectric.com, and you can follow us on social. Our Twitter is at InsideElectric. Our Instagram is also at InsideElectric.
Basically, you don't have an excuse not to follow us, is what we're trying to get across here.
We make lovely things.
We do. We make lots of the memes.
But we appreciate you tuning in, and hopefully see you over the season.
Bye.